Since the general election in May, I think British journalists have been scurrying around trying to find out exactly what the UK government's negotiating position is in respect of its ambitions for a renegotiation with the EU treaty and other member states. One topic crops up on everyone's list, namely the UK's desire to give greater powers to national parliaments to block or to hold up EU legislation.
The European Union is a union of states and citizens. It divides decision-making vertically between the European, the national, and sometimes, as it has been explained here, depending on the constitutional setup, also the regional level. That means we have a system of vertical division of power between different levels in the multi-government system, but we also have a horizontal division of power between the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission, which leads to quite open negotiations.
The EU is such a multi-layered system of governance, unlike the German system of government, that I think involving national parliaments to some degree would help to improve to some degree the expertise and interest of national parliamentarians in what the EU does.
Now, to just say a bit more about what we can do as national parliaments. I hinted at some of the difficulties. One is lack of focus. Two is a lack of huge variation in resources and national traditions.
In terms of how the two chambers deal with Europe, you have something very different. There are 41 parliamentary chambers, national parliamentary chambers in the 28 member states. There are obviously all sorts of other parliamentary chambers. But of the 41, they are on a spectrum of those that really don't have time to deal with Europe at all, through all the way to the Danish Parliament, which is very much always seen as the beacon, the parliament that is most effective at holding its government to account.
Some parliaments are informed by their ministers before and after council meetings. Others are not. Some governments actively provide their parliaments with all council documents. Others do not. Some allow their national parliaments to take up European issues independently from government initiative. Others do not. National parliaments could execute their rights more easily if some common quality standards concerning their role in the national process as regards union matters were established.
The Danish Folketing does that very effectively, but it does it in a way that I think would be extremely unpopular in the United Kingdom. The idea that on every issue the Prime Minister or one of his ministers would be summoned to Parliament, and it would undoubtedly be to the House of Commons, and told by Bill Cash and the European Scrutiny Committee that they were permitted to do X, Y or Z, would be seen as unnecessarily fettering the government. If you adopt the Danish system, you very clearly tie the hands of government in a way that makes negotiations very difficult.
I'd like to see something closer to the Danish system. I'd like to see ministers coming either to a committee or to a plenary session of the Commons before a key meeting, and the Prime Minister should do this more often than he does, to explain what he plans to do and to take advice from the Commons, and then after report back.
We persuaded the government, very much against their will, and now they can't get out of it, to have pre-council scrutiny rather than post-council reporting. So that we borrowed from the Folketing in Denmark as a concept.
I've been trying to analyze, let's say, more fundamentally the difficulties national parliaments are having to really engage. And one of the difficulties is really this question of interest, identity of interest between parliaments and their own governments. Because to take on your own government, that's the difficult issue, in a system where a parliamentary majority supports a government.
Among other things, if we want to get clout, we have to think about being focused to make our opinions felt, and we have to make absolutely sure that this is done in the context both of keeping our own national parliaments and governments under scrutiny, but also in preparing to collaborate and work very closely with European colleagues.
Certainly the British have totally misunderstood the European Parliament and not understood it. For better or worse, it has a huge amount of power. It may well get more power, and they need to take it seriously. And the Tory party pulling out of the European People's Party greatly diminished British influence in the EU. Anybody in the EU system knows that.
At the moment, one of the most effective chambers, certainly according to former Commissioner President Barroso, is the House of Lords. The chamber that can devote the most time to Europe is one that is not elected, and it's precisely because it's not elected that it can devote that time, because members of the House of Lords aren't expected to go home to their constituencies every weekend and do casework.
We, in 2014 to 15, we scrutinised nearly 150 European Union legislative proposals. We took evidence from 180 witnesses and received 161 written submissions, did 12 reports, had about 400 media pieces, although we're not really gagging for the publicity because we don't have to be re-elected.
We try to contribute to proper information, hosting all national parliaments with a collaborator in the premises of the European Parliament in Brussels. How did national parliaments react to this offer, which is an offer to come in good time and have an impact on a changing legislation? Some parliaments have responded to this, many parliaments have not. Some don't know how to deal with this. Is this a question of expert input? Is this a question of political input? But in fact, this should address exactly what parliaments have been asking for, that they are not restrained to a negative role in the process, which means to say we don't want this to go forward, but they are playing a constructive role.
Now, already, national parliaments have a formal role in the scrutiny of EU legislation through the so-called reasoned amendment procedure, through which national parliaments can signal if a proposed measure breaches the principle of subsidiarity, triggering a yellow card if over 1/3 of national parliaments issue reasoned opinions. Also, the Conference of Parliamentary Committees for EU Affairs brings national parliamentarians together. But are these enough?
As we said, right, we're going to invent something called a green card. Now, in honesty, let's give the credit. That isn't us, that was the Dutch Parliament, but it sort of fell into my hands that we were doing this, and we thought green card is a good one to go for. That has been submitted to the Commission. It's not on manoeuvres against the European Parliament. It's not actually subversive to what the Commissioner wants in a circular economy, but it's saying we think it matters. We've ended up with nearly half the chambers, of 41 actually, it's 18 plus ourselves, who have submitted this to the Commission. We are awaiting a response. We are hopeful of a positive response. But it's designed to be a way of taking Europe forward without being subversive of anyone else. Now, I'm happy with that.
I also think the green card idea that Lord Boswell talked about is very interesting, and I'm all for green cards. Why shouldn't that happen too? What is going to happen is the yellow card procedure will be enhanced. And when the British citizens learn that there is an enhanced yellow card procedure coming out of these renegotiations, a couple of million people will demonstrate in Whitehall to say, great, we have an enhanced yellow card procedure. Yes. No, it is. We do actually. I mean, I think we of all the bits of Cameron's renegotiation that we kind of are thinking about at the moment. This is one where I think it won't be a red card because that would be a huge change. But I think although there's some hostility to it, particularly from countries like Belgium and Germany, and indeed from the European Parliament, I think it will happen. The Commission, I think, might promise to respect a yellow card, to withdraw a proposal if a yellow card is raised. Not through a treaty change, of course. This would just be a kind of an interinstitutional agreement.
Isn't necessarily demanding treaty change and saying we need a red card, but going and talking to national ministers and saying, you know, you can stop things. Because if the House of Lords and the House of Commons have both said a particular Commission proposal breaches subsidiarity, then surely the Prime Minister or whichever minister is going to the Council meeting can also say, the UK feels this breaches subsidiarity, we're not going to support this legislation. However much the Prime Minister wants to talk about getting more powers for national parliaments as part of his sovereignty basket of demands in the current renegotiation. It's not really a question of national parliaments necessarily needing more formal authority. It's about national parliaments using the powers they have.
I think the national parliaments need to play a role in improving the legitimacy of the EU. The main way that I would touch is this. The European Parliament always wants more power for itself, and that is its main rationale in life. And it always wants more money for the EU budget. And I think on both those issues, it is out of touch with the majority, though not all citizens. Every time they get more powers, fewer people vote in the next election. That's been the case since the first direct elections in 1979. Every single election, including the last one last year, the turnout has gone down, which I think is because a lot of people think that the European Parliament doesn't speak for them.
We have to give people the chance to not only compose a parliament, but at the same time they need to have a chance to say who should be running the executive. Of course, has been first time, has been very unevenly applied. In Britain, parties were not very much demandeur to invite these lead candidates to come here, to appear in television, and the effect therefore was minimal. In other countries it was different. 12% said in Germany, in Austria, and Luxembourg, they went to vote for the parliament because they didn't only have a vote on its composition, but for the first time they had a chance to say who should be running the executive.